Hello, SFCA. Welcome to episode, I think, 4 or 5 already. Wow. So, we are going to be reading chapter, chapter 8 of Frindle. So, let me get our bookmark out. So, Frindle by Andrew Clements, and we're reading chapter 8. Let's get straight into it. Right. Chapter 8, Mightier Than the Sword. 2 days later, the photographer came to take class pictures. The 5th grade picture would be taken last, right after lunch. That gave Nick and his secret agents plenty of time, and they whispered something into the ear of every 5th grader. All the individual pictures had been taken. Finally, it was time for the group picture. Everyone was lined up on the auditorium stage. Everyone's hair looked great, and everyone was smiling. But then when the photographer said, say cheese, no one did. Instead, every kid said, Frindle! And they held one up for the camera to see. The photographer was out of film, so that was the shot. So that shot was the only 5th grade picture he took. 6 of the 5th grade teachers were not pleased, and Mrs. Granger was furious. No one had really wanted to make the teachers mad. It was just fun. They all got the kids in school talking about the new word. And when people picked up a new word, they say it all the time. The kids at Lincoln Elementary School liked Nick's new word a lot. But not Mrs. Granger. The day after the class picture, she made an announcement to her class, and she posted a notice on the main bulletin board by the office. Anyone who is heard using the word Frindle instead of the word pen will stay after school and write this sentence 100 times. I am writing this punishment with pen. Mrs. Granger. But that made everyone want to use Nick's new word even more. Staying after school with the lone Granger became a badge of honor. There were kids in her classroom every day after school. It went like that for a couple of weeks. One day, near the end of the 7th period, Mrs. Granger asked Nick to come talk to her after school. This is not detention, Nicholas. I just want to talk. Nick was excited. It was kind of like a conference during a war. One side waves a white flag, and the generals come out and talk. General Nicholas Allen. Nick liked the sound of it. He stuck his head in Mrs. Granger's doorway. You wanted to talk to me? Yes, Nicholas. Please come and sit down. When he was settled, she looked at him and said, Don't you think this Frindle business has gone far enough? It's a disruption to the school, don't you think? Nick swallowed hard, but he said, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's just fun. And it really is a real word. It's not a bad word, just different. Besides, it's how words really change, isn't it? That's what you said. Mrs. Granger sighed. It is how a word could be made brand new, I suppose, but the word pen, should it really be replaced by that other word? The word pen has a long, rich history. It comes from the Latin word for feather, pinna. It started out to become our word pen because quills are made from feathers, were some of the first writing tools ever made. It's a word that comes from somewhere. It makes sense, Nicholas. But Frindle makes just as much sense to me, said Nick. And after all, didn't somebody just make up the word pinna, too? That got a spark from Mrs. Granger's eyes. But all she said was, Then you are not going to stop this? Nick looked right in her eyes and said, Well, me and a bunch of my friends and I took an oath about using the word. We have to keep our promise. Besides, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I like my word. Nick tried to look brave, like a good general should. Very well, then. I thought it would end up this way. Mrs. Granger pulled a fat white envelope from her desk drawer and held it up. This is a letter I have written to you, Nicholas. Nick held out his hand, thinking she was going to give it to him, but she didn't. I am not going to send it to you until all this is over. I want you to sign your name and put today's date across the back of the envelope when you read it. Whenever that may be, you will know it is the same letter, and I have not made any changes to it." "This is weird," Nick said to himself. But to Mrs. Granger he said, "Sure," and he signed his name in his best cursive, put the date under it. Then Mrs. Granger stood up abruptly and said, "Then that is all for today, Nicholas. May the best word win." There was a frown on her face, but her eyes were different, almost happy. Nick was halfway down the hall before it hit him. She likes war, and she wants to win real bad. Walking to school the next day, Pete had a great idea. "How about we see if we can get every kid in the whole 5th grade to go up and ask Mrs. Granger, 'Can I borrow a Frindle?'" "I mean, Mrs. Granger, may I borrow a Frindle?" said Dave. "Gotta use good grammar. Don't want to upset Dangerous Grangerous." "Sounds good to me," said Nick. "She can't keep everyone after school, can she?" Almost 80 kids stayed after school with Mrs. Granger that day. She filled her room and spilled out into the hallway. The principal had to stay late to help, and they had to arrange 2 special late buses to get all the kids home. And the next day, all the 5th graders did it again, and so did a lot of other students. Over 200 kids. Parents called to complain. School bus drivers threatened to go on strike. And then the school board and the superintendent got involved. And about this time, the principal of Lincoln Elementary School paid a little visit to the home of Mr. and Mrs. Allen. She wanted to talk to them about their son, the one in 5th grade, named Nick. Chapter 9. Chess. Oh, wait a second. Before I do that, I forgot to show you this picture. Picture of Mrs. Granger handing Nick the letter. It's a very thick letter, don't you think? It's a letter. Right. Chapter 9. Chess. Mrs. Margaret Chatham had been principal of Lincoln Elementary School for 18 years, and she knew Mr. and Mrs. Allen, because they had all served together on the building committee when the old Lincoln School was torn down and a new one was built 6 years ago. When she telephoned on the afternoon of October 1st to set up the meeting, Mrs. Chatham had asked Nick to be there too. It was 6:30 when she knocked, and Nick opened the door. "Good evening, Nick," she said. No smile. "Hi, Miss Chatham," said Nick, backing away as she filled the doorway. She was a large person, as tall as Nick's dad, with wide shoulders. Nick guessed she would play linebacker on a football team because that's what his dad had played in college. "Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Allen," she said, stepping into the living room. She was wearing a long black raincoat with a red silk scarf tied loosely around her neck. She kept her coat on. She took off the scarf and tucked it into her left pocket. She shook hands stiffly with both of Nick's parents before sitting down on the chair to the left of the couch. Nick's mom and dad sat on the couch, and Nick sat on the rocking chair that faced Mrs. Chatham across the low coffee table. "This is not an easy visit for me. We are having some trouble at school. It appears that Nick is in the middle of it." Then while Nick's parents listened, Mrs. Chatham laid out the story as she saw it, Nick encouraging the other kids to use his new word, Mrs. Granger forbidding it. The ruined 5th grade class picture hundreds of kids staying after school, and a general feeling that there was a rebellion at school, with no one respecting the rules anymore. Nick watched his mom and dad while Mrs. Chatham talked, looking from one face to another. His dad was listening carefully, nodding and frowning. He looked embarrassed about the trouble, but his mom looked kind of annoyed. And then Mrs. Chatham finished her story. Nick's mom was the first one to speak. "But doesn't this all seem a lot of fuss about something pretty silly?" Nick sat quietly, but in his mind he shouted, "Hooray for Mom! Hooray for Mom! Mothers everywhere!" His mom wasn't annoyed with him. She was annoyed with Mrs. Granger, maybe even annoyed with Mrs. Chatham. This was getting interesting. Mrs. Allen was still talking to the principal. I mean, is there really any harm in children making up a funny word and saying it? Does there have to be a rule that a word like this may not be used? Mrs. Chatham sighed and said, Yes, I suppose it does seem silly. But Mrs. Granger thinks that it's rather like keeping children from saying ain't. There are having to be standards. That's why we have dictionaries. And really the problem isn't so much the word itself, it's the lack of respect for authority. Mr. Allen said, Mrs. Granger's right about that. There have to be standards. We can't have kids walking around saying ain't, can we? And that's when Nick pipped in. You know the big dictionary in Miss Granger's room? Word ain't is right there in the book. I looked it up, and there it was. I don't see why I can't use a word if it's in the dictionary. Mrs. Granger even said that her big dictionary was the law. Nick looked from face to face to face. That stumped them all. He had just launched a first-class thought grenade. Well, yes, but, well, as I said, the word ain't and even the word Frindle, these are not the real issue here, said Mrs. Chatham. Mrs. Nolly said, well, I think the real issue is Mrs. Granger's reaction to a harmless little experiment with language. It's an overreaction. Don't you think so, Tom? Said Mrs. Allen, looking to her husband. It was Mr. Allen's turn to look from face to face to face to face. He was lost. Yes, well, sure. I guess so. I mean, it's not like anybody's been hurt. It's not like vandalism or stealing something like that. His sentence trailed off, and he rubbed his chin and stared thoughtfully through the window on the wall behind Mrs. Chatham. While the three grown-ups sat there in an uncomfortable moment of silence, Nick had a sudden vision of what was really going on here. It was a chess game. Nick against Mrs. Granger. Mrs. Granger had just tried to end the game by using her queen, Mrs. Chatham, in her black raincoat, the Black Queen. Nick didn't know it until the attack was underway, but he had a powerful defender of his own, good old Mom, the White Queen. The game was not over. It would go on until there was a winner and a loser. Mrs. Chatham didn't stay much longer. There was a little more talk back and forth across the chessboard about how children have a right to explore new ideas, about the importance of respecting teachers and the work they do, about everything needed to keep up standards and make a school a safe place to learn. Then Mr. Allen offered Mrs. Chatham some coffee and banana bread, but she said, No, thanks. I really must be going now. She thanked Nick's parents, and they thanked her. Nick opened the door and said, Good night, Mrs. Chatham. Then the Black Queen put on her red scarf and walked off into the October twilight. Nick, I think we better have a little talk. Nick, I think we'd better talk a little more about this, said his mom, sitting back down on the couch. If I find out that you have been disrespectful to Mrs. Granger or any other teacher at school, then you will really will be in big trouble. I haven't been disrespectful, honest. I did get everybody started using my word, but like you said, it's not hurting anybody. But I'm sorry if me, Dave, and Pete got everybody to ask Mrs. Granger to borrow Frindle. That was mean, I guess, but she started it by making kids stay after school and write 100 sentences just for saying my word once. All the kids like to use my word. It's just fun, that's all. Well, said Nick sad, if it gets everybody upset and makes the principal come talk to your mother and me, it must not be fun for everybody, is it? And I think you should just tell all your friends to knock it off, right now. I mean, tomorrow. Nick shook his head. I can't, Dad. It won't work. It's a real word now, and it used to be just mine, but not anymore. If I knew how to stop it, I think I probably would, but I can't. Nick looked at both of their faces to see if that idea was sinking in. It was. Like I said, I won't be disrespectful, but I do like my word, and I guess now we're just going to have to see what happens. The chessmen, Nick's king and queen, had to agree. the game would go on. Oh wow, I have been reading for a long time. So we're on chapter 10 now, and I'm going to stop here until the next episode. So go to the next episode of Frindle on chapter 10 to see what happens next. And that's all. I'm Lizzie, and bye.